Usually when we look at massive catastrophic failures, we expect to find a mechanical flaw.
Right, like a physical engineering problem.
Exactly. A singular, visible crack in the foundation. I mean, if you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points and says, there it is. That's the problem.
Yeah, it's binary. It's either broken or not broken. We naturally want the smoking gun because, well, it's comforting.
We prefer our disasters to be visible.
And easily categorized, yeah.
But then you step into the world of catastrophic organizational failures, and suddenly that x-ray machine just doesn't work anymore. The diagnostic landscape is incredibly murky.
Oh, it's a complete mess.
Right. So think about the collapse of Enron, or the tragic Boeing 737 MAX certification failures, or even the 2008 global financial crisis.
On the surface, I mean, those seem like totally different industries.
Completely. Dealing with totally different regulatory environments and, technical problems. But if you look closely at the postmortems of these disasters, they share this really terrifying common denominator.
And it wasn't a sudden lack of smart people in the room.
No. And it wasn't a sudden loss of technical skill either. The common thread was a mystery of human behavior. It was organizational silence in the face of known risks.
Yeah.
I mean, people knew the ship was sinking, they had the data in their hands, and they just said nothing.
Which is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. When employees perceive that, disagreement carries career penalties, the most critical information fails to reach the decision makers precisely when it matters most.
It just gets swallowed by the hierarchy.
Exactly.
Well, that brings us to our mission for this deep dive. Today, we are looking at a highly regarded piece of research called The Strategic Imperative of Psychological Safety. It's by Jonathan H. Westover.
It's a fantastic paper.
It really is. And we're going to explore why the most successful, high-performing teams in the world actually run on disagreement.
Which sounds completely counterintuitive.
Right. But more importantly, we want to show you how you can use these insights to turn uncomfortable conversations into a strategic advantage, whether you are leading a boardroom or you're just trying to survive your next team meeting without losing your mind.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Okay, let's unpack this. The core premise of this paper is that silence is basically deadly for business, and the antidote is something called psychological safety.
And what's fascinating here is just how rare that safety actually is in the modern workplace. Surveys consistently show that fewer than half of employees feel comfortable voicing concerns to their leadership.
Fewer than half. Wow.
Yeah, and that proportion drops even more sharply when their concern contradicts whatever the prevailing assumptions are, or, if it challenges powerful stakeholders.
So you have more than half the workforce basically walking around with metaphorical duct tape over their mouths?
Pretty much.
And it's just staggering inefficiency. I mean, companies spend immense resources, time, and money hiring the best talent, putting them through rigorous interviews to ensure they have these brilliant minds.
Only to drop them into an environment where they're terrified to speak up.
Exactly. So, if silence is the disease, we need to talk about the cure. But before we do, we have to dispel a massive misconception. Because when I first hear the phrase psychological safety, my mind immediately goes to, a corporate retreat.
Oh, with the trust falls?
Yes, trust falls, everyone holding hands, and a mandate that everyone just agrees on everything to keep the peace.
Yeah, that is the most common misinterpretation, and it's completely backward. The foundational definition of psychological safety actually goes back to Amy Edmondson's 1999 research.
Okay.
She defined it as a shared belief held by members of a team that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking.
Notice she didn't say safe from conflict.
Right. It specifically addresses whether you believe you can voice concerns, admit mistakes, ask questions, or propose totally unconventional ideas without facing social or professional penalties.
So it is absolutely not about just being nice.
Not at all.
The paper emphasizes this point heavily. It is not unconditional comfort. It is not the absence of accountability. And it is definitely not consensus-driven decision-making.
Oh, consensus decision-making usually just grinds progress to a halt anyway.
Right. Everyone has to agree before you move forward, which takes forever.
High-performing, psychologically safe environments actually combine that feeling of safety with incredibly high standards. Edmondson calls these learning organizations as opposed to comfort zones.
That distinction makes a lot of sense.
You feel simultaneously challenged to perform at your absolute best, but secure enough to acknowledge when you need help, or when the current approach just isn't working. It's a high-friction environment, but the friction is productive.
That makes a lot of sense. It sounds like psychological safety isn't about laying on the couch in your comfort zone. It's more like being at the gym with a good spotter.
Oh, I like that.
You're lifting heavy weights, you're expected to work hard, and the bar is high, but you know someone has your back if your arms give out. You aren't going to get crushed by the weight of your own inevitable mistakes.
That's a great analogy. And the reason you need that spotter is because of the intense power dynamics at play in any organization.
Right.
The research maps out this really steep gradient. Senior leaders typically report the highest comfort speaking up. Middle managers feel less safe, and the frontline employees feel the least safe of all.
Which seems like a massive structural vulnerability. I mean, the frontline employees are the ones actually touching the product, talking directly to the angry customer, and seeing the fatal bugs in the code.
Exactly.
The people with the most direct, critical operational knowledge are the ones structurally positioned to be the most terrified to share it.
It creates a massive blind spot for leadership. And this dynamic is exactly why so many corporate diversity initiatives fail to deliver actual business results.
Wait, really? How so?
Well, theoretically, diverse teams benefit from broader perspectives,
Right.
right? But the research shows that diversity's advantages only materialize when psychological safety is already in place. If it's not, minority views just can't surface.
Ah, I see.
Without that safety, diversity just increases the likelihood that people will withhold their unique perspectives because the social risk of standing out is too high.
Right. They read the room, realize it's not safe to be the lone dissenting voice, and they just keep their brilliance to themselves.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've established what psychological safety actually is now. This high accountability, high security learning zone. Let's look at the mechanics of what happens when organizations actually pull this off.
The fun part, data.
Yes. How does an abstract psychological concept translate into hard numbers? Let's talk about the famous Google study, Project Aristotle.
Right, so Project Aristotle is a landmark study in organizational behavior. Google analyzed 180 of their teams over 2 years, trying to find the magic algorithmic formula for the perfect team.
Which is such a Google thing to do.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
They looked at every variable you could imagine: individual talent, resource availability, team composition, whether the engineers were introverts or extroverts, even if they socialized outside of work. But the number one predictor of a high-performing team beating out every single demographic and technical metric was psychological safety. Teams where members felt safe taking risks generated better results across innovation, efficiency, and overall satisfaction.
And it goes far beyond the tech sector, too. The paper dives into this incredible study Edmondson did in healthcare, which led to what we could call the hospital paradox.
Yes, this is fascinating.
She looked at medication error rates across different hospital units, and she found that the units with the highest psychological safety actually reported the most medication errors.
The most error.
No, wait, let me push back on this for a second. If I'm a patient, hearing my hospital has an exceptionally high error rate sounds absolutely terrifying. I want the hospital that makes 0 errors. How does a high error rate translate to better care?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it changes how we view those numbers entirely. Those highly safe units weren't making more mistakes because they were clumsier or less skilled. They were reporting more errors because they were actually catching them and talking about them, instead of hiding them out of fear of being fired.
Oh, I see. So the other units, the ones with low reported errors, were likely making just as many mistakes.
Or even more.
They were simply burying them in the paperwork.
Precisely. Because when you hide a mistake, say, a nurse notices a confusingly labeled drug, but doesn't mention it to avoid looking incompetent, the system never learns from it.
So that same drug labeling error will just happen again tomorrow.
Exactly. But when you report it, you enable early detection and rapid systemic improvement. The research estimates that improved psychological safety could prevent between 50 to 75% of preventable medical errors.
That's wild.
We're talking about preventing tens of thousands of deaths in the U.S. annually just by making it culturally safe for a nurse to say to a senior attending physician, I think that dosage you just prescribed is wrong.
That completely flips the paradigm of what a good metric looks like. And you see the exact same mechanic in the tech world. The paper notes that tech firms that catch software bugs during the development phase, rather than after the product is released to the public, save money at a ratio of 100 to 1.
100 to 1.
Yeah. That kind of early detection only happens if an engineer feels safe enough to raise their hand in a stand-up meeting and say, hey, I messed up this code, or this architecture we've spent a month on is fundamentally flawed.
And in the financial sector, the stakes are just as high.
Hmm.
We see loan committees that actively encourage genuine debate and challenge rosy assumptions, experiencing much lower default rates on their portfolios.
Makes sense.
If a loan officer feels safe challenging a senior partner's optimism about a particular corporate borrower, the committee is forced to build more conservative, realistic risk models. The dissent acts as a crucial stress test.
Beyond just avoiding disaster, the day-to-day engagement of the workforce skyrockets too. The paper notes that psychologically safe employees yield an 18 to 43% productivity advantage.
Which is huge.
Think about the physiological cost of constantly censoring yourself, the cognitive load of wondering, can I say this? Will my boss be mad? Will I lose my bonus if I point out this flaw? It just drains your mental energy.
Oh, completely.
When you remove that tax, people just have more bandwidth to actually do their jobs.
It significantly reduces burnout. You stop wasting your mental RAM on impression management, curating how you appear to your superiors, and you start spending it on actual problem solving.
So the data is bulletproof. It works. It saves lives in hospitals. It saves millions of dollars in tech. It makes people happier and more productive.
Unquestionably.
But how do leaders actually build it? Because we all know that an open-door policy is usually just empty corporate rhetoric.
Oh, for sure.
A manager says their door is always open, you walk through it with a massive problem, and they immediately get defensive. What are the specific behavioral mechanics that actually rewrite the unwritten rules of a company culture?
Well, it starts with something that is very counterintuitive and difficult for a lot of executives.
Which is
modeling fallibility. Leaders have to explicitly and publicly admit their own mistakes. And it can't be generic. A leader saying, well, nobody's perfect, doesn't count.
right, that's a cop-out.
It needs to be specific and operational. It needs to sound like, I was wrong about our Q3 strategy because I failed to consider the supply chain data you all provided.
The paper gives a fantastic example of this from Pixar. They instituted this event called Notes Day, where anyone in the studio, from junior animators to lighting techs, could submit constructive criticism about any part of the operation.
I love this example.
Yeah, and to kick it off and prove it wasn't a trap, the director, Brad Bird, and the president, Ed Catmull, stood up and publicly shared their own operational mistakes. They explicitly thanked employees who had previously flagged problems that they, the studio heads, had initially dismissed.
That is profound because it signals that perfection isn't expected, even at the very top. It proves that admitting a mistake doesn't destroy your credibility or end your career. It establishes a behavioral norm where finding the truth matters significantly more than appearing infallible.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though. It's not just about admitting when you are wrong. It's about fundamentally changing how you lead when you think you're right.
Yes, exactly.
It's what the paper calls question-centered leadership. Instead of the boss sitting at the head of the table doling out answers, they shift their role to asking specific, probing questions.
And you don't mean a lazy, does anyone have any concerns at the end of a meeting?
No, because no one ever answers that honestly. It means looking at a plan and asking, what specific assumptions are we making that would cause this approach to fail?
It's the shift from asserting your own expertise to inquiring about the expertise of the room. Satya Nadella did exactly this when he took over as CEO of Microsoft.
Oh, right.
He fundamentally shifted the culture from what he called a know-it-all environment to a learn-it-all environment. In leadership meetings, instead of demanding flawless status updates to prove everyone was working hard, he started asking, what are we missing here?
That's a great metaphor for the transition. So instead of the boss acting as the answer key for the company, where everyone just comes to them to validate if they are right or wrong, they need to act like the search engine, constantly querying the team to find the best data.
It requires immense discipline to operate that way. The paper suggests leaders actually track their own dialogue in meetings, aiming for a 3-to-1 question-to-statement ratio.
Wow, 3 questions for every statement.
Yeah, and making it a mandatory, structured practice to close meetings by asking, who sees a pitfall we haven't discussed? Doing this consistently alters the fundamental psychological contract of employment.
Unpack that a bit, the psychological contract.
Traditionally, the unwritten deal between employer and employee was loyalty for security. You do what you're told, you don't rock the boat, you implement the boss's ideas, and in return, we'll keep you employed.
Sounds like the 1950s.
Exactly. But in the modern knowledge economy, that contract is entirely obsolete. The New Deal replaces that old dynamic with a totally different trade, which is intellectual honesty for authentic conclusion.
So the organization demands that you speak truth to power.
And in exchange, you are genuinely included in shaping the direction and success of the company.
That makes perfect sense for a high-functioning knowledge economy, but it leads us to a glaring vulnerability.
What's that?
Well, relying on a single enlightened leader like a Satya Nadella or an Ed Catmull feels like playing leadership roulette.
Hmm.
What happens when your boss isn't naturally humble? What if your manager is a narcissist who views any question as a personal attack?
That's a very real problem.
If we want this to survive bad managers, we have to look at how organizations structurally guarantee this dissent, regardless of the individual personalities involved.
Right. We have to move from behavioral mechanics to structural mechanics. You have to institutionalize the troublemakers, so to speak.
Institutionalize the troublemakers. I love that.
You have to build hardwired systems that elevate dissenting views so they bypass middle management and reach decision makers, even when interpersonal dynamics might naturally suppress them.
The paper mentions Bridgewater Associates, the massive hedge fund, as an example of this structural elevation of dissent.
Yes.
They use a system called believability-weighted decision-making. From what I understand, they literally record their investment meetings, and if a junior analyst disagrees with a senior portfolio manager, that disagreement is documented.
It's intense.
And they assign a believability score to people based on their track record of making correct predictions. So if a junior analyst is consistently right about a specific sector, their dissenting vote is mathematically weighted heavier than a senior executive who doesn't have a good track record in that area.
Yes. They prioritize the historical evidence of being right over whoever holds the highest title.
I have to admit, though, recording every single disagreement and assigning everyone a literal credibility score sounds completely exhausting. It feels a bit dystopian to me. Is that level of radical transparency really necessary for a normal, mid-sized company to function well?
This raises an important question about scale and practicality. Bridgewater's approach is definitely at the extreme end of the spectrum, and the paper acknowledges that it isn't for everyone.
Yeah, I'd probably quit if I had a believability score hovering over my head.
Right. Not every company needs an algorithm to weigh employee opinions, but the underlying principle behind what they are doing is universal and necessary. Organizations must structurally tie career advancement to intellectual courage.
Okay, that makes sense.
If you have an HR system where going along to get along is the actual metric that gets you promoted and gets you your year-end bonus, then all your stated corporate values about open communication mean absolutely nothing.
Right. Employees are incredibly observant. They watch who actually gets the corner offices. If the yes men who never challenge the boss are the ones moving up, the culture is set in stone.
Regardless of what the motivational poster in the break room says.
Exactly.
Look at how a company like WL Gore, the makers of Gore-Tex, handles this. They operate using a lattice organizational structure rather than a traditional top-down hierarchy.
A lattice structure.
Yeah, in their system, leaders don't just get appointed by executives. They emerge through followership. Employees essentially get to choose which projects they work on and who they work with.
Wait, so how does that structurally protect dissent?
Because the internal market corrects bad leadership.
Oh.
If you are a project leader and you start suppressing dissent, ignoring good ideas, or punishing people who speak up, talented people will simply stop choosing to work on your projects.
So your team shrinks, your projects stall, and your influence evaporates.
Exactly. The structure itself rewards leaders who listen and penalizes those who enforce silence without needing a single HR intervention.
That is a brilliant self-correcting mechanism. The paper also highlights another structural piece called procedural justice, which revolves around the perceived fairness of how decisions are made.
Yes, procedural justice is key.
They use the Cleveland Clinic's Patient and Family Advisory Council as an example where they utilize a strict you said, we did model.
Procedural justice is the critical bulwark against cynicism. When you constantly ask people to speak up and offer ideas, you have to close the feedback loop. Otherwise, they feel like they're shouting into a void.
Right. Why bother speaking up if nothing changes?
At the Cleveland Clinic, if a patient suggests a change to the intake process and the hospital implements it, they explicitly credit that suggestion. But more importantly, even if the idea is rejected due to budget or regulatory constraints, the hospital makes it a procedural requirement to explain the specific logic behind the no.
That's the secret ingredient right there. Even if my idea isn't used, Just knowing it was genuinely considered by the leadership and hearing the logical constraints behind the rejection keeps me engaged.
Exactly.
If you just ignore the suggestion entirely, I assume you don't care, and I am never sticking my neck out to speak up again.
And part of making that feedback loop work at a structural level is giving people the actual data they need to formulate a good argument, empowering employees to challenge leadership using shared metrics.
They call it data transparency, right? Creating these data courts.
Exactly. A data court is an environment where anyone in the company can present an analysis challenging a current practice, with the institutional commitment that the data will outweigh the hierarchy.
Okay, so it takes ego out of it entirely.
Yes. When a junior employee has access to the exact same dashboards and performance metrics as the CEO, they can ground their concerns in shared, objective facts rather than just offering a competing, subjective opinion. It levels the playing field so a good idea doesn't need a fancy title to be heard.
We have covered incredible ground today. Let's synthesize this journey. We started by dismantling the myth that psychological safety is just about being comfortable, polite, and avoiding conflict.
Right, it's not a warm blanket.
It's a high-performance engine fueled by productive dissent. We saw how it prevents massive, tragic medical errors in hospitals by bringing mistakes to light early, and how it saves tech companies millions of dollars in post-launch bug fixes.
The ROI is undeniable.
We broke down how leaders build it behaviorally by modeling their own fallibility, shifting from dictating to asking probing questions, and we looked at how companies structurally hardwire it by tying promotions to courage, using lattice structures, and ensuring every suggestion gets a transparent response.
It requires a relentless, consistent commitment to both behavior and structure. It builds slowly and it's easily damaged, but when achieved, it creates an organizational capability, a speed of learning that competitors simply cannot copy.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this right now? Next time you're sitting in a meeting and you feel that familiar knot in your stomach, that little internal alarm bell telling you a strategy is deeply flawed or a deadline is literally impossible, remember that speaking up in that moment might be the most strategically valuable thing you do that entire quarter.
Spot on.
You aren't being a nuisance. You are protecting the organization from its own blind spots. And if you happen to be the one running that meeting, take a breath, look at your team, and ask yourself and them, what am I missing?
As we look to the future, though, I'd leave you with this final thought. Everything we've discussed today relies heavily on human dynamics. Reading the room, trusting a leader, feeling empathy.
Yeah.
But we have to wonder about the rapid rise of AI and algorithmic management in the workplace. If your manager is an automated system assigning tasks, evaluating your performance, and dictating schedules based purely on data points, how do you express dissent?
Wow.
How do we build psychological safety when the entity we need to challenge, the structure we need to push back against, isn't human at all?
Oh, that is a chilling thought. How do you tell an algorithm that its X-ray machine is broken? That is definitely something to chew on. Keep digging deep, keep asking the hard questions, and most importantly, stay curious. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.